Hello. Today we look at one variety of critical reasoning questions, which is assumptions, or which of the following options will help us reaching the conclusion if that is considered to be an assumption to this particular argument. Going by the standard nature of a critical reasoning question, there would be a premise, there would be probably an additional or a counter premise, there would be a conclusion for sure in assumption based questions. Here, the working will be backwards. We'll assume that the conclusion is right. We'll try to add some more value in terms of filling up the loophole for helping us conclude. This filling of the loophole is done by assumptions. Assumptions are described as what must be true in order for the conclusion to be true. However, there would be a visible confusion between must be true answers and assumption based answers. The difference is one that can be described as before versus after. Assumption answers contain statements that were used to make the conclusion. Must be true answers contain statements that follow from the argument made in the stimulus. In both cases, however, there is a stringent requirement that must be met. Must be true answers must be proven by the information. Assumption answers contain statements the author must believe in order for the conclusion to be valid. The questions sound like this: which of the following is an assumption made in drawing the conclusion, or which of the following is an assumption for the question, and things like that. Let's take one example to understand. Example 1. Doctors in Britain have long suspected that patients who wear tinted eyeglasses are abnormally prone to depression and hypochondria. Psychological tests given there to hospital patients admitted for physical complaints like heart pain and digestive distress confirmed such a relationship. Perhaps people whose relationship to the world is psychologically painful choose such glasses to reduce visual stimulation, which is perceived as irritating. At any rate, it can be concluded that once such glasses are worn, it is because the wearer has a tendency to be depressed or hypochondriacal. The argument assumes which of the following? Let's look at the options one by one. The argument is a complex one. The first one, depression is not caused in some cases by an organic condition. Useless kind of a data will not help us conclude. See, in assumptions, we have to first understand what is the conclusion. The conclusion is the other way around, wherein he says it can be concluded that when such glasses are worn, it is because the wearer has a tendency to be depressed. So we are assuming this to be the conclusion. We are in search of an assumption. This data is of no use to us. Option B, wearers do not think of the tinted glasses as a means of distancing themselves from the other people. Whether they are distancing or not, we don't know whether they have a reason to be depressed or hypochondriacal. We are out with the option B also. Option C, depression can have many causes, including actual conditions about which it is reasonable for anyone to be depressed. A generic statement made about depression does not help any of the causes. Option D, for hypochondriacs wearing tinted glasses, the glasses serve as a visual signal to others that the wearer's health is delicate. Stupid. Where are we talking about the perception of the people who look at them? We are only talking about their psychological or mental condition. This is not what we are talking about. Option D gets eliminated right away. Option E, the tinting does not dim light to the eye enough to depress the wearer's mood substantially. This is the assumption we are looking forward to. When you consider the argument again, the question here is that if he is wearing a glasses, it is because he has a tendency to be depressed or hypochondriacal. Here the assumption says that the tinting does not have enough light and that depresses the wearer's mood substantially. stands by the assumption, and this is the answer we are looking forward to. Let's look at another example so that we understand assumptions more. Assumptions will put a small ticker in your mind for the only reason that here the option might not be something straight out of the passage. See, generally people end up confusing an assumption to a strengthen also. Strengthening the argument will be something which will fit into the premise. Assumption might be something where the author is assuming something before he is concluding. It could just fit in before the premise. Along with the premise, it could be an additional data as well. This demands a lot of discretion. Therefore, these kind of questions are reasonably tricky. Let's consider another example. Example 2. The current pattern of human consumption of resources in which we rely on non-renewable resources, for example, metal ore, must eventually change. Since there is only so much metal ore available, ultimately we must either do without or turn to renewable resources to take its place. Which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? What are we talking about? We are talking about our reliance on non-renewable resources and the fact that it should change. Let's look at the options. First one, there are renewable resource replacements for all of the non-renewable resources currently being consumed. Does not help us with the conclusion. Yes, one more sentence probably right, but not an assumption. Statement may be right, may not be right, not the assumption we are looking forward to. Option 2, we cannot indefinitely replace exhausted non-renewable resources with other non-renewable resources. This is spot on. The author here wants us to move out. He is giving a justification. Here the assumption is that we cannot replace it, which is correct. Probably this is the answer we are looking forward to. Again, too early to reach out. Let's look at the other three options so that we can probably conclude or look for a better option. Option C, a renewable resource cannot be exhausted by human consumption, does not help us. Not an assumption material. Option D, consumption of non-renewable resources will not continue to increase in the near future. Consumption of non-renewable resources will not continue to increase. Does that help us? Does it help us conclude? No. Random data might or might not be useful, out of question. Option E, ultimately we cannot do without non-renewable resources. Too strong a statement, not serving the purpose of an assumption. We go back to the answer that we had parked, which is option B. For the assumptions, the gray area is that we will have to assume the premise. We will have to take that the conclusion is right, find such a statement which helps us justify the conclusion. Again, I am repeating, this might or might not be a part of the paragraph which is given. Assumptions are tricky because there is a visible chance that you could confuse an assumption with a strengthen or assumption with a must be true. Either which ways, we need to be careful in assessing everything and remember those basics of assumption. Happy reading.